Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mastering Dungeons. I'm Sean Merwin here with my co-host, Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos. How's it going, sir?
Sean, I am doing really well. I'm looking forward to a great week. I'm very positive.
Me too. I'm trying to think of something sarcastic to say, but I can't because I am looking forward to a good week. Yeah. So you're right. You're right. And
I mean, you had an amazing week.
I did.
At least at Ghostfire Gaming.
Yeah, the Ghostfire Gaming Kickstarter for Grim Hollow, the Monster Grimoire, ended up at $1.34 something million. And it's like I said on the Nerdarchy Live stream that if I had run it myself, it would have been $1.34. So you know, it's amazing what having a great team around you can do. And I'm just happy to be part of that team.
I think they probably feel the same way. They're like, we would have made these huge numbers, but how would the product be without Shawn? And now you're helming it.
It would have been
amazing people writing these monsters.
Oh, yeah. It would have been $1.34582 instead of $3. So, I contributed. But there is good news
I backed
everywhere.
it. I'm looking forward to getting a copy.
Awesome. Me too. just hundreds of monsters to go. But there is good news on the horizon for D&D and for RPGs in general, and that's going to kick off our news segment. We got more news about Wizards of the Coast's success demographically, financially in 2020. They sent out a press release showing the stats of recent growth. Some of the stats they included were 50 million fans worldwide have played D&D in 2020. It's the 7th straight year of growth in player participation in sales and so on, and a 33% increase year-on-year growth globally. So it's still going. The first time we heard that, it was like, wow, it's continuing to grow even after a year, and now we're 7 years into it, and it's continuing to grow. So, it's a runaway, as my wife would say, it's a runaway train wreck.
It's like my kids were, just every year growing.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. And hopefully WotC doesn't have to go to college at the end of that. But do you want to talk about some of the more in-depth, fascinating demographics you saw?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was so interesting. So they provided this pie chart of the breakdown by age of different players. And I think what they did is they broke down the ages such that you see how evenly distributed it is. Mm-hmm. And it is kind of incredible because generally what you're looking for in a company is to identify, like, what's your demographic? And what this pie chart sort of tries to say is our demographic is yes, all of the above. Mm-hmm. But when you look at it a little closer, there's some surprises, especially maybe to those people who love saying, why isn't Wizards bringing my favorite setting from back in 1980, whatever? Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that people who are ages 40 plus are 13% of the overall breakdown. Mm-hmm. So 13% of gamers playing D&D are 40 and above. That's you and me, Sean.
That's
so
us.
We are 13%. And maybe that's why Spelljammer hasn't arrived yet. Mm-hmm. And then a 12%, so almost the same, are ages 15 to 19, which is wonderful.
Yeah. So there are almost more players ages 15 to 19 than there are over 40. And we were stuck in such a mindset, rightfully so, even 10 years ago, when the most of the gaming population that we would see, but also most of the gaming population, was getting older. And now that trend seems to have reversed.
Yeah, we've talked about on the show, we would be at conventions looking around going like, oh no, this is going to be really bad in a decade or two if nobody new is coming in. All of us are this age. And that's just not true anymore, which is wonderful because those 15 and 19-year-olds hopefully have 40, 60 years of gaming ahead of them or more. Mm-hmm. That's awesome, right? And awesome for the brand.
Yep.
So then we have some more breakdowns. Like 24% are ages 20 to 24. This is the biggest demographic, which is a huge change. That itself is awesome. And if we add those two together, we can say that 36% of all players are 24 or younger. Another 18% are ages 25 to 29. So again, if we add that up, 54% of all players are ages 29 or younger, right? More than half are 29 or younger. That's great. That's really good. It's exactly what companies would love to see, because you've got a strong base that's grown up with the game, and then they're hitting the spending ages. That's great. 80% are ages 30 to 34. 40% are ages 35 to 39. So like 32% are in their 30s, you know.
Yep.
That's great. You know, and that's almost the highest level pie chart. 54% are less than 30. 32% are in their 30s, and 30% are in their 40s and up. So great. The demographics are also changing in terms of male, female. 40% are female, less than 1% other non-binary. So that's improving from polls of the days of old. Yeah, and just a lot of fascinating information. Like they say that sales of DM-focused books, such as the DMG and Monster Manual, all grew year over year. And that's amazing on several levels, one of which is that usually your old material, even your core books, just tend to drop off over time. Right. Or that amidst all the many books, it can be hard to find what you're supposed to buy. Mm-hmm. So the idea that the DMG and MM are still selling strong now suggests that players are DMing, are buying, these original core books, and that's exactly what D&D would want to see. It's great.
Right, because players' handbook sales are great, but that doesn't mean the DMs, which are important to running the game, are actually engaging. And now seeing that sort of engagement, DMs spawn players, which then spawn new DMs, which then spawn new players. And so that's the sort of cycle that we love to see. Streaming play looks like it is also piquing everyone in everyone's interest. March of 2020 saw an all-time peak in searches for D&D streaming, D&D live play. I am not surprised to see that millions of people downloaded the free material that was part of the stay-at-home, play-at-home program that WotC produced as we were entering lockdown because of the pandemic. I know from personal experience that certain adventures were downloaded at least 100,000 times. And for D&D,
everybody got it free. Don't forget to get something else by those creators, because
exactly,
that was a lot of downloads.
Yeah, it's all good. And D&D Live 2020, which was supposed to have been in Los Angeles in the springtime of 2020, which was moved to online because of the pandemic, had over 4 million views at some point during that. And TikTok has over 1 billion views of the D&D hashtag in 2020. So that just shows that, again, sort of the younger generation for whom TikTok is their social media platform of choice is also engaged in D&D socially.
Yep. And if you're older like me, you see TikTok on Twitter when people just repost it. So.
Exactly. It's all it's all spreading the joy through all the social media outlets. And so what's the deal with Dark Alliance video game?
Yeah, so they went through at the end because this was, all this information came through as a sales piece that was given to various places. So sort of a press release. And at the end of the graphic was information on upcoming releases. That included June 22nd, where Dark Alliance video game comes out, and they noted that this is not a license. This is the first video game that comes from their own studio that they created. We reported on a while back. So that's a big deal because it's their cash, it's their investment, and it's their profit. Yeah, hopefully. So we'll see how that comes on June 22nd. There's been a lot of drum up for that. Then they talked about D&D Live and D&D Celebration, which are, again, being held. So this is, I think, the first confirmation of D&D Celebration being an event of some sort. We don't know the details on it. Yep. It also looks like D&D Live doesn't have a gaming component. It is a media type of, viewership streaming thing. And then just we know that there'll be additional books coming, but nothing here that told us exactly what But shout out to tribality.com. They had a really nice coverage of this. And if you go to tribality.com, you can see these actual graphics for yourself. So a number of places covered it, but I thought theirs was particularly useful.
Mm-hmm. And in the realm of big names talking about D&D, the Summer of Drizzt has launched, and Benedict Cumberbatch voiced the animated D&D Drizzt video, which blew my mind.
Yeah, you sent this to me, and I'm like, okay, what?
Yeah, it's like, hello. So it's a short video where they talk about Drizzt, and they sort of give that whole spiel. And my first thought was, okay, this makes sense. They're doing some trailers essentially to get people interested in Dark Alliance. And then I thought, wait a second, they're doing a TV show. We know that the word Underdark was mentioned in that TV show. By the writer, by the writer. So is this television production going to have something to do with Drizzt? And so, do you want to give us more detail about what you found?
Sure, and I mean, I think it all makes sense. You and I had talked about sort of, what is D&D doesn't have one story, but if you look at it, it has several stories that can feel like a D&D story, and one of them is certainly Drizzt's story. So, it's maybe all adding up to something, right? Summer of Drizzt. Well, why is Wizards launching this? What's this mean? They created a new Legend of Drizzt webpage, which is at the dnd.wizards.com/story/legend-of-Drizzt. So good luck finding that, but it is out there. Right. And the page reviews, it has sort of information to tell you if you don't know about like the companions of Drizzt, Catti-brie, Wulfgar, Bruenor, Regis, the story of Menzoberranzan and things like that. Mm-hmm. It talks about the Dark Alliance video game, which focuses on Drizzt and the companions. The site also has a change in lore, which is really fascinating. So we have been talking a lot about how D&D looks at orcs or drow, and whether in what ways that's harmful, not whether, but how it's harmful, and how to maybe undo that. And so one of the things that's interesting here is that we get just matter-of-factly included in all of this lore that's on this webpage, the idea that there are two other drow cultures, the Loren drow and Aven drow, who live in other cities and who do not follow Lolth. Mm-hmm. So this is likely an attempt by Wizards to try to revise this look at the drow, right? As sure, some are evil, but others are not. This is a complex tapestry, and it's not like Drizzed is some, miracle snowflake, that has come out of nowhere. He is one of many, right? And then this is a species that has, or a race that has, a multiplicity of ways of expressing itself, like all real peoples do. Mm-hmm. So that's cool.
Yeah. I was going to say, and next we find out that there will be a new novel by R.A. Salvatore called The Starlight Enclave that releases August 3rd. So that's another pin in the bulletin board that is the Summer of Drizzt.
Yeah, and then a Legend of Drizzt Amazon store. So that tells you something about how these companies are looking at things when you create your own little Amazon store. And it's sort of fun to look at it. It has the Dark Alliance video game. It has that Legend, or the Drizzt statuette that came up through Hasbro. So there's another data point that I'd sort of forgotten about, because they have this limited edition figurine with the two swords that are wrong.
Yeah.
And then, did you happen to watch this video with B. Dave Walters?
I did not.
Yeah, I only watched a part of it just due to time, but I love B. Dave Walters. Such a great voice. And he has a video where he hosts R.A. Salvatore talking about the story of Drizzed. And so it's a good catch-up if you don't sort of know about how R.A. Salvatore went around it. It's always great to hear him talk about it. So this is on my list to go back and watch later. Yeah. And then we've seen also Drizzed and Loth in the new Magic the Gathering set. A bunch of cards are in this video and in other videos. Yeah, showing that off.
So more cross promotion. Using Drizzed as a linchpin for pointing out video game book. I'm surprised there's no comics mentioned here, but maybe there will be by the time. Exactly. And then all of this, of course, comes together to make us wonder if this D&D TV show may have some sort of connection. So we will find out at some point, but it's not today.
No. Very exciting.
We have new D&D movie news. The British actress who plays Genya Safin on Shadow and Bone, a Netflix series, has been cast. And did we put the other news that came out about? We didn't put it in the show notes, but I'm going to mention it.
Okay.
Apparently, when you create a movie, you have to register it for copyright reasons. And the copyright registration was put out on Twitter and other places on what the synopsis of the movie is.
Oh, but I saw something that said that maybe that wasn't actually true, though.
Exactly. So first came out the synopsis, which talked about, how basically a party of four, a rogue, a wizard, a barbarian, I think, or a fighter, and a druid, not a cleric, a druid, come together. One was a harper who had been in prison and was released, and so they're joining back up with their group, to fight an evil ruler of the city of Neverwinter. Said this synopsis. So everyone, of course, lost their mind in various ways, right? I'm like, oh, that would be a great movie. You're bringing in lore, but it's like a heist film.
Yeah, sounds great.
You could make this work well. And then a bubble was burst when someone later said, well, they really don't have to tell the truth on what they did, because it was a pre-registration. So you can really say anything you want in the pre-registration, but you do have to, put the copyright details correctly in the actual registration.
Right.
So this could just be a red herring. It could be true, but it's fun to speculate.
Super fun.
Yeah.
And if it is true, it seemed pretty cool. So
right.
That's
exactly. So if it ends up being the movie, I'm okay with that. And if it's not, I wait to see what else they can come up with.
Yeah. The most interesting speculation I heard around it was the idea that someone noted that the synopsis didn't say anything about sort of the real world element, right? And you and I have always wondered, like, would there be this sort of the Stranger Things where we show the game being played and then go into the world, the fiction of the game? Do we go back and forth? And so there wasn't, but as you said, anything it doesn't necessarily mean that's there, not there.
Right.
But I happen to go back a step. I have been watching Shadow and Bone, this Netflix series, and Daisy Head plays a cool role in that. So I'm curious to see, sort of as a late addition to the cast, what she'll bring to it. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Good stuff all around. Dragon Talk, which Teos was on last week. We pointed it out that he would be on, and sure enough, he was. I watched it. It was a great episode. You and Shelley really, had fun, but did some cool D&D work.
We had fun.
Yeah, and it's something that can be intimidating to new players or to new people that want to DM. But the way you handled it showed very well how you can sort of share that burden and create something all together. And I thought it was wonderful. And now you're pointing out that Dragon Talk has a new feature called Insight Check. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, so this seems to be a new segment from what they mentioned on the show. And this was the show before last where this first premiered. So Insight Check is where they're going to introduce a recent staff addition. So I guess it's your opportunity to learn about these people that have joined the staff. And the first one they did was on the awesome Mackenzie DeArmas. She is an associate designer who started in January. And she shares her background and the type of work that she's doing, though it's sort of funny because being an addition in January, there's nothing that she can talk about because it's all not yet released.
It's all new.
But yeah, there's just hints of the type of work being done and the dynamic and what it was like to join Wizards during the pandemic, right, where you can't actually visit the storied halls and see the big giant statues and things like that. But it's a really cool idea to give this understanding of where designers come from and introduce us to these new people because they can't go to conventions and things like that yet. So I hope they cover not just the recent editions because we've had a number of those, but also staff members have been around for a while, because I feel like there are a lot of new players coming in all the time, and they don't necessarily know who any of these folks are in any great depth. So.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have Mackenzie come talk to my college class about writing for RPGs, and she was amazing. What she covered monster design, and her monster design was amazing. It was great for the students to see, but it was also great to get perspectives. Some of the people I had come talk to the class were 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and she is pretty much newly out of college with a creative writing degree, which is what some of these students were getting, right? So she was basically a year older than them. So it showed them that it's not just these people who have been designing role-playing games for 30 years or 40 years. Anyone can get into this business if you are smart, if you are talented, if you know what you're doing. The opportunities are there. So I'm glad Mackenzie got to share it with my class, and then also got to share it on Dragon Talk.
Yeah, I mean, I have to confess that there was something about listening to this interview where at times you just feel her age, and you're like, wow, you're that good at this age. It's sort of like when you think about, Joey Hake or just any number of really talented new people we have these days, and you just think, wow, I can't wait to see where their careers are going to go, because they're this good this early on. And I love Mackenzie's monster design and the MCDM adventure. It's issue. I think it's the first or second issue. Love what she did with those elemental monsters. Like that's right up my alley. Fantastic. Can't wait to see everything these folks are going to do.
Yep, absolutely. And speaking of older game designers, people who have been around a while, Monty Cook has started up his blog again. Now he's discussing the concept of conceptual distance, how far the premise of a game world is from what players understand. And whenever I see Monty start to blog again, my first thought is, okay, he's working on something new, because he's got to talk about it. So, do you want to tell us what this blog talks about?
Yeah, he makes the point that in most fantasy role-playing games, the players are able to grasp the concept pretty much immediately. And that's because our game doesn't require a degree in medieval history. We're not recreating it. We're sort of using the highlights of the concepts. And there is a bunch of media that lets us know that we don't need to worry about, say, like, I don't know, everyday infectious diseases or what it's like to go to a medieval market. But we get the idea of, like, we will fight with swords. Our clothes might be sort of rough, homespun kind of things. Just these high concepts. And we can just jump right into the game. And then it's just tell me the particular rules and let's have fun in this adventure. But the more that a game steps away from that and requires explanation, the harder it is on players to grasp and to get going. And so he makes the point that futuristic science fantasy games are harder because we don't know what the players can or can't do with their characters. Mm-hmm. And the designers have to bridge that gap in some way. And he talks about sort of how he did it in Numenera and in an upcoming game that he is developing to bridge that gap, which it makes you go, oh, okay, this is interesting. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something that, while he can say that in most fantasy RPGs the players can grasp the concept, it's not really that easy, because running Dark Sun and running Eberron are two different things, where you do have to get through those assumptions, and you do have to find a way not only to make the setting work in the minds of the players, but make the rules work with the setting in the minds of the players. So it is a challenge. There's no doubt. And, Monty knows that as well as anybody. So it's interesting to see, obviously, like, Numenera was something completely different. And you do have to then set the ground rules around, whenever you write anything, you're creating the world with words. You can call it the real world, but my real world is different from Teos's real world, which is different from everyone's real world. So you're always sort of setting the barriers, setting the frame for any story, any game you make. So it's interesting to see Monty. I'm going to say pontificating, but I mean it in a good way, right? Exploring this concept, and probably, hopefully, as he develops his game, he will continue exploring that with us and sharing his knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, and this applies to campaigns, as you make an excellent point with Eberron and Darksun, because sometimes in our campaigns we want to come up with these really cool, wacky concepts, but the players, if they're supposed to know what life is like there, then you need to give them something. And even in our review of Rime of the Frost Maiden, right, the idea that the rhyme had been around for 2 years before the start of the adventure then begs a way to communicate that to the players properly so that they know how to feel about how they should feel about this. How do most people around me feel like this about this? And if you don't tell them, and if you don't tell the DM, then that creates that conceptual distance where we don't know exactly how to interact with this.
Right. Yep. So you can check that out. We have a link in the show notes. It's montycook.substack.com. And continuing with the theme of blogs, we have DM David talking about how to run an ambush. He discusses stealth and how the ambush rules in 5e don't really work well because you compare the stealth checks of anyone hiding with the passive perception checks of the opposing side. And any character or monster that doesn't notice the threat is surprised at the start of the encounter, meaning the ambushes almost never succeed because someone's stealth check is going to be lower than someone's perception check. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, he goes through this basic concept and makes a number of sort of suggestions. One is to assume that the person that is ambushing knows what they're doing. And so to represent that, add 10 to the ambusher's stealth bonus to sort of turn their bonus into a passive as well, rather than rolling. Because you have 10 goblins, one of them's going to roll terribly, that spoils the surprise. So just assume they're taking 10, right, as we would have said in older editions. Mm-hmm. So if they have a +6 to stealth, then they got a 16. And now ask yourself, are they doing a good job at this? Because if so, they should get advantage, and as we probably know from the DMG, you add +5 to the total when you have advantage on a passive. So now it becomes a 21, and now we have a good basis by which only those characters that have high passive wisdom perception scores are going to avoid surprise, but most of the party will, which is probably what you intended for. Mm-hmm. And he also points out that this sort of process mimics how traps work, and ends up being better. And then he gives just a number of scenarios and covers how those scenarios can play out in ambushes for maximum fun, including the idea of when initiative should start. So I found it all a very valuable read.
Yeah, he really breaks things down nicely. And so you can give that a read at dmdavid.com. Oh, we got through the news. And now we are going to not take the deepest of dives into Candlekeep Mysteries, but we are going to give sort of a background on what it covers, and then each of us will dive into one of the adventures contained therein. So, as an overview, Candlekeep Mysteries is an anthology of adventures written by different members of the D&D community. Each adventure begins with a specific book that the characters find in Candlekeep, which is an enormous library located on the Sword Coast in the Forgotten Realms setting. So you can obviously run these adventures using a different setting, and they give some examples of where to run it if you're using Exandria, which is the Critical Role world, Eberron, where you can get the library of Korenberg, or the Moorgrave University Library in Sharn. Hey, if you're going to go really old school and go to the Greyhawk City world of Orth, you can go to the Great Library in the Free City of Greyhawk.
So I had two quick thoughts here. One is
Greyhawk confirmed.
Greyhawk confirmed. The first is that they started with Exandria, the Critical Role area, and I thought that was very interesting because of. I think it took the spot of what I would have expected, which is the great library that exists in Dragonlance, mm-hmm. Where the one person who writes down the lore of ages exists, right. And all. And that's such a that'd be a classic example. And so it's sort of very interesting to see because they often seem to forget that they had a Critical Role book. D&D just seems to not mention it often.
Right.
The staff and the other products, and so nice to see that shot out here. It's good. I hope we see more of that.
Yeah. And it's odd for me to see this because Candlekeep is such a unique area in not just Forgotten Realms, but in D&D, right? It is a very specific thing with a very specific purpose and a very specific history. So yes, you can put a library and these books in those libraries, but those other libraries are definitely not like Candlekeep. In any way, shape, or form.
Here's what's interesting about this book is that this book doesn't actually spend a lot of time in Candlekeep. That's the big spoiler of Candlekeep Mysteries. Yeah, is that it's not. We get we'll talk about what they do explain, but they don't cover. This is not floor plans of the library,
right?
And because of that, these adventures can take place in any darn library, anywhere, even a little one. Like, it doesn't even matter, because they're not written that way, which I actually missed. Like, I actually wanted to see the halls of Candlekeep a bit more and adventure in them. That's what I thought I was getting.
Right.
And as I read adventure after adventure, I think I only found one that takes place in Candlekeep.
Yeah.
So because of the approach they've taken, sure, this could be any library because we're just, literally pulling a book off the shelf and getting zapped into another dimensional space or something like that. And,
yeah. And for me, I'm okay with that because historically, Candlekeep is a problematic place to run adventures. It is such a vault. It is such a locked down vault that to bring trouble to Candlekeep sort of flies in the face of its actual reason for existence, which is to keep trouble out. So I sort of like the idea that these books can be anywhere and you can just open it and boom, you're gone. So for me, it's sort of a dual book, right? It's sort of a book. Yes, here's some cool things about Candlekeep, and then here are the adventures that really can go anywhere, or do anything.
Yeah.
So it's a feature. It's a feature and a bug.
Yeah, it's like a TV show that like Twilight Zone or something like that, where we're not necessarily being told about the larger world, that we're giving a fantastic adventure that spreads away from the world, right?
Yep.
And I thought it was sort of interesting because when this book was first advertised, only in the very early stage, it was sort of like, yeah, we realized when we wrote Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus and we send you to Candlekeep that there isn't a lot there, so this will flesh it out. Not really. Yeah. This doesn't flesh out that experience greatly. Yeah. It just gives you maybe some side quest adventures you could throw in, but that would detract from everything. It's interesting. But as you said, these are fun adventures, and it is what it is. It's okay with what it is.
Yep. So there is first an overview, which I just covered. There's a using the adventure section where it gives you the standard text about, hey, guess what? Each adventure is for a certain level, but you can adjust them. Really? Can we? I never knew that. But I guess, every book you really have to say these things because you may be getting a new DM. So, this as much as experienced DMs may joke about it, you do need to say it over and over again. Each adventure starts with the characters finding a book that contains a mystery. And so the adventure is solving the mystery that is set off by the book. They give typical advice on using box text, being sensitive to the players, and content warnings that they may need, how it can change the adventure, using the Forgotten Realms, talking about we don't have weeks in the Forgotten Realms, we have 10 days, and here's what the calendar of Harptos looks like, because that's one of the first things to steep your players in the history, right? This is going back to Monty Cook's point, right? You want to let them know what the world that they're in means, and so you need time is important, on how to refer to time. The time frame of the book.
As the nerd that I am, I just got to say that this time frame thing was a big thing for me because the most popular page on my blog is the one about the official timeline of D&D.
Right.
People are constantly apparently searching for when things take place, And I'm sure they end up at my webpage and go, really? This is the order of the adventures? That can't be right. Yeah. And we kind of get that a little bit here. So we're told that the default time frame for this book is 1492. That's the same year as when Descent into Avernus, Baldur's Gate, and Dragon Heist take place. But it has some wrinkles in there if you're interested in the timing of it, because it talks about an ogre with a headband that's reading a book about Storm King. And the time frame it gives for how long that's been doesn't quite add up with all the rest of the calendar. So I've always find these pieces fascinating, and I updated my blog entry to deal with that, because there's always a struggle, and I find it fascinating. We've talked about this before, that D&D doesn't want to say things when things are, but also can't help but say when things are and refer to previous adventures in its own text. And so there's another little piece here that I thought was very interesting from that lore time perspective.
Right. I mean, I will get lots of emails, texts, tweets, Facebook questions about things I've written. And probably the most, the question I get the most is that. It's, hey, you wrote this adventure. When does it take place?
Wow.
And my usual question is, I have no idea. That was the last thing on my mind when I wrote that. So wherever you want it to take place, that's when it takes place. And then we get the Candlekeep as a setting section. So, what is Candlekeep? And we talked about all of this before when this book was being written and talked about. We went through what is Candlekeep and why is it important. So just for a brief summary, just south of Baldur's Gate on the Sword Coast, Candlekeep sits on a peninsula that sticks out into the sea. It's a walled town that surrounds the library, and to get into the town, you have to get through a gate that is heavily guarded. The only way you're allowed entry is if you provide a valuable book that the library doesn't already have, or a different version of a book, a valuable version of a book. It's odd.
And I just want to note that the adventures don't always tell you how you get into Candlekeep.
Right.
So one of the things that DMs, what I would have loved to have seen is a section sort of saying, like, for a DM, sort of how can players get in? Like, should that be its own adventure? Should you just assume the book? And even just a group exercise where the players together decide what the book is that they're bringing.
Yep.
That would launch the adventure. Can be fun, right? Just a fun little, and I would have loved some sort of table or method by which that could all be facilitated. But some of the adventures are just like, you get in. And I think one or two of the adventures mentions a reason, like a book or even the book that's involved or bringing in, but most of them don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So wait, how did I get in?
Right. It's something that you as the DM have to decide how deep you want your characters to, or your players to get involved in that. If you're just going to hand wave it and they get in because they get in, that's fine. But if you want to steep them in the lore of this area, this is really the most important thing. Because if you go back to Baldur's Gate, the video game, what's the reason that you can't, right? You start in Candlekeep, you leave Candlekeep, and then all of a sudden, hey, you can't get back into Candlekeep. Go out into the real world, and it's because you don't have a book. So that's a real sticking point for people who have played that game. It's like that's the most important part of Candlekeep.
And we do get some rules for like how you can be allowed to come back. You can sort of have various types of passes and stuff, so that's good. Mm-hmm. I would say though, we had this when you and I designed the Confrontation at Candlekeep adventure for the early 5e days. That was one of the things we had to deal with. And what we just said in the premise was just, hey, the first thing you do when you sit at your table is come up with the book that you brought as sort of your character introduction. And that ended up being a lot of fun for tables. And sure, not everybody came up with, a genius answer, but some of the people, I think once per table, someone will come up with such a great concept for the book they're bringing.
Right.
And it's just, it's super fun. So I would suggest the DMs, encourage the DMs to give your players that chance to come up with what book they're coming in, and it can be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Then we hear more about the structure itself and the defenses and decorum around it. So if you try to break in first of all, it's very hard to do because there are magical wards everywhere that prevent flight that prevent teleportation into the area. Normal creatures, like small birds, can fly in, but larger creatures, magical creatures, are not able to get past these defenses. There are anti-fire and anti-theft protections also on things inside. There's also a missile that can be activated as a precaution if there is a major calamity. But if you act badly, if you are a bad actor in or around Candlekeep, archmages can basically show up in the blink of an eye and annihilate you. So it is good if you're a player to mind your P's and Q's, and if you're the DM to, let that part of the setting really sink in by, if your players are the kinds that like to do things that are questionable, just have an NPC next to them do something that's questionable. An archmage shows up and disintegrates the trespasser. And that should pretty much cure them of that, hopefully. We get stat blocks for the sages, master sages, as well as the avowed who are tasked with maintaining Candlekeep. These avowed range from commoners to high-ranking members of a hierarchy, the Keeper of Tomes being the highest-ranking member of the avowed. And then there are things like people like the First Reader. There are 8 Great Readers, Master Readers, Chanters, and so on. So it gives you a history of the hierarchy, the religious, and the arcane organizations that hold sway within Candlekeep.
And I racked my brain or confused myself by trying to read through this to find a reason why the Master Sage, as a stated action, has the Fireball spell.
Yep.
I was like, they've got to explain this. Like some note that says the Master Sage can cast a fireball that doesn't damage books or something. But no, it's just like literally whoever made this Master Sage stat block, assuming it's new for this book, fireball as an action.
Well,
found that the strangest thing.
They may need to leave the library at some point, and that's a handy spell to have if you're outside the library, right?
Yeah.
You're not having any of it.
All right. I mean, because they have a spell list, the things they can cast once per day, 3 times per day. Yeah. But then it's specifically given out. Like, I can always cast Shocking Grasp. 3 times per day I can cast Fireball. And it's like, is that what you prepped a lot of? Because okay, all right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully the characters will never have to run into the Master Sage or any of the higher ranking people unless
you've done something
very, very bad.
Yeah.
And then so we get a description of the outer courtyard, maps, just ways to help navigate for the DM and the players within Candlekeep itself, even though it's really never used or not used much in any of the adventures.
Yeah. And I think anyone who really wants to work with that level of detail, you should check out the amazing Elminster's Candlekeep Companion. I'm a bias because I've worked on the team, but I think everybody who's looked at it agrees that this is an amazing book that was written by Justice Armand and why am I blanking?
Anthony Joyce.
Yes, Anthony Joyce, and then a whole host of other folks helped with it, and including Ed Greenwood. And it is probably the best reference on Candlekeep you'll find in terms of what life is like in Candlekeep, how to run adventures within it, maps, the amazing maps by Marco, just incredible work. And what is sort of surprising about this book is that it clearly is influenced by that DM's Guild release. Though I didn't see it mentioned in the credits. The map is basically Marco's map, and there are a number of little details about life in Candlekeep that come from that DM's Guild book too, which is kind of surprising. But so I highly recommend checking that out. And one other thing I found surprising is, you and I worked at Confrontation at Candlekeep, including with Ed Greenwood, to establish various locations, but those don't actually seem to appear in this book, which and all the names are different and things like that. So it's like, okay, they chose one influence but not another that was perhaps more Wizards of the coast standard, but yeah, just found that.
Yeah,
so it is. So it goes with lore and age.
Exactly. That's why I've given up on even caring about canon too much. I mean, do your research, use what you want, discard what you don't want, and make something your own. Yeah. I'm cool with that. So anything else about this overview of Candlekeep? The only thing that like I mentioned earlier is that Candlekeep is such a fortress. It's such a magical place. It's such a vault that is not meant to be disturbed, that you have to sort of give a reason why anything disturbing might happen in there, right? If there's not supposed to be teleportation magic going on, to open a portal in the middle of Candlekeep sort of flies in the face of everything that you just read can't happen. So you have to take all of that with a grain of salt as you work through these adventures.
So, yeah, one thing that I would say is that what your adventures can be, I mean, obviously you can have like a big deal event happening. Like that's what Confrontation at Candlekeep does as an adventure, right? There's such a huge attack that all of the powerful monks and archmages are off in the front lines fighting, and you, the adventurers, are needed to recover these sort of stones to erect a protective shield, right? Like that's the kind of adventure you can write that's big and grandiose and still can fit because there's such a big thing going on. Yeah. Or there can be small things, right? Someone opens a book and a monster leaps out and you're right there, so you do things like that. But also what you can do here is it can be an opportunity for things like downtime. And we talked about this in the Elminster's Candlekeep Companion. Part of what I helped with was the downtime ideas. Because it can be really interesting to be doing research or kind of mystery type activities like, so-and-so could give you information. Wait, where are they? Where have they gone to? You must find this person. Or the book's gone missing. It must be located. That kind of interesting can be a lot of fun, right? Where it's not about combats necessarily, but it's about these sort of different skills that you use. Candlekeep's a great place to do that.
For sure. And the first adventure that we're going to talk about, actually, you are looking for someone in the library. So the first adventure that we're going to talk about of the two is the first level adventure called The Joy of Extradimensional Spaces, by Michael Polkenhorn.
Great title.
Edited by Hannah Rose. And the reason I chose this adventure is it's the first one. And if you are going to give a series of adventures, you better make sure the first one is strong, sets the right tone, has a good way for new DMs to run it and new players to get involved. So that's what I reviewed this adventure hoping to find. And overall, I found it. I think this was a really nice first level adventure, both for new players and new DMs, to get into D&D by avoiding some of the problematic things that we sometimes see in adventures, especially early first level adventures, and still have it be fun and challenging and tapping into the imagination. The one problem I had was in the opening of this adventure, where they sort of talk about the concept. They give some information, but they don't really summarize the adventure for the DM. And it's not a horribly complicated adventure, but it does have enough moving parts where I would have loved to see right at the start a synopsis of the adventure. This is what the characters are there for. This is what happens. And this is the potential outcome based on these factors. Because as I was reading, I was confused. And you want to alleviate as much confusion as possible, as early as possible for DMs. We have to remember that we're writing these adventures not to be read for fun, although you can. They're not written for the players. They're written for the DMs to present. So you need to treat it like the user manual that it is, so that it can be best used by DMs. Aside from that, everything else was great as far as I was concerned in this adventure. The adventure has the players going to Candlekeep in search of a sage named Matrius, who can help them with a problem. The sample problem they give is that there is a blight that is hitting their home region, and someone has told them that Matrius is the sage who has the answer. So there they go. They go to Candlekeep. They ask, where's Matrius? And they are told Matrius is working in a private study in the library. Let us show you where he is. So the characters are taken to that study. And when they get there, they find Matrius is not there, although all his things, his books, his personal effects are all laid out on a table as if he had just been there. So this then leads to the discovery that he was reading about extradimensional spaces from a book called The Joy of Extradimensional Spaces, as opposed to The Joy of Cooking, say.
Or sex.
Or of sex, of course. And so they can find the password to this extra-dimensional space, even though they probably don't know the extra-dimensional space is there. So there's a little bit of confusion here.
Yeah.
You have to read it a couple of times to realize that the book that he's reading was written by a powerful mage named Fistandia. So Fistandia loved to explore and think about extra-dimensional spaces. So she created one with the portal to that place being right in this particular study. And so the book had a password to show the portal, but no one ever put two and two together so they might say the password, but they weren't at the place where the portal door is. Now, Fistandia always used this particular study, and Matrius learned that, went to that study, and then found the space. So that's why no one else over the years ever found that space. So that's not explained clearly at first. That's why I was talking about sort of needing to be stated up front what's going on. So you may, as a DM, have to sort of massage this and put some clues so the players realize that they need to say this word that's in the marginalia of this book, and it's open to that page, so there's a clue there. If they say this word, the portal opens. They see the doorway to this extra-dimensional mansion, which is a version of Mordenkainen's magnificent mansion, which Fistandia created and made permanent. So you sort of have to do, as the DM, a mental walkthrough of what's going on. So the players say the word, doors appear. Oh, here's the portal. Hey, let's go through. There is a small problem or a potential problem with this whole portal thing, especially when the premise of your adventure is you go to the portal, you step through the portal, and then you get trapped. Because what happens is with more than one group, someone, I will step through the portal. Everyone else is waiting. Now, anything going on the other side of the portal, if there's a trap, you can't reveal that to the rest of the players or they won't step through. And then it turns into sort of this awkward, well, we know that we have to step through because that's where the adventure is. So, okay. Especially because when they step through the portal, they immediately run into the sage that they were seeking, Matrius. So Matrius says, hi, and you can introduce and you can say, hey, Matrius, we came here to seek your help. Would you help us? And Matrius says, yes, if you do me a favor, I need you to go through the rest of this sort of extra-dimensional mansion for me. If you do that, I'll help you with your problem. Perfectly wonderful way to get adventurers in. A-okay. The problem comes when Matrius says, okay, I'm going to go back through the portal and wait for you on the other side because I've got some research to do. So he steps through, and when he does, even though we are not told this, even as DMs are not told this, he has this imp statuette that he found that he's taking back through. When you step through, and by the way, tons of spoilers here. I think doesn't need to be need to be told. When you step through, the imp turns into a real imp. The imp figurine turns into a real imp, stings Matrius, and he dies. So here's that whole problem of if one character steps through, the rest don't. He does all the talking. Matrius comes through. If the characters are on the other side, they see this happening and could potentially stop the imp from killing Matrius. Now, when Matrius steps back through, he can do so because he, quote unquote, knows magic, knows the way to do these things. However, the players don't. So the players are supposed to... I think
that is it shuts down, right?
Right.
The portal closes or something like that.
It closes. Yeah. It doesn't really give a good explanation on that. It specifically says Matrius says, well, I know how to get back through, so I'll go through. But the players are supposed to be trapped on the other side. And I have no problem with that. Just as the DM, you might need to massage the story a bit, depending on what shenanigans your players get up to. So if it all goes according to plan, Matrius walks back through. All the player characters are still in the mansion, but now the portal shuts down, and they need to find a way back through. They can learn how to get back through by exploring the mansion. There are clues that they can run across, but it may be a while before they run into the different encounters. There are something like 17, I think, rooms for them to go through. So it's significant. It's not, just 2 rooms and you're done. And the clues that are given to solve this problem, find the password back through the portal, they may not run into right away. There's a good chance they will, but if they choose to go through the wrong door or down the wrong passage at the wrong time, they could go through most of this before they actually realize, oh, there's a password, and this is how we find it. So again, as the DM, if your players get frustrated easily by things, you may need to put the path in front of them as opposed to letting them wander and be frustrated until they find it themselves. I'm going to take a breath, Teos. Is there anything that you want to add to all of this?
You in the notes you mentioned some of the monsters that are here, and one of the things I liked is a lot of these adventures have new monsters. They tend to be really cool. You can talk about this one you mentioned here because it is really neat. But they're either just really neat. They're often things from the past of D&D, like Gingwatzim in one of the adventures is such a shout back to old AD&D kind of silliness monsters.
Lost Island of Castanamir.
I thought that was great.
Yeah. So
I love that adventure.
Yeah. As Teos mentions, there are neat monsters, and not only that, but they're all animated objects. So one of the first things with new players you run across is you put a sentient creature up against the player characters, and there's instantly this sort of moment of, are we supposed to kill things in this game or not? And it can be an awkward moment. With here, you're attacking animated books, so you're not killing anything sentient. You're attacking an animated room. You're an animated bookcase, these sorts of things, which is a safe way to get that sort of combat out of the way, to get it into the minds of the characters and the players to sort of get that social contract built if you don't have a good session 0 to build it from the start. When I see all animated things as monsters, my first fear is there's going to be nothing cool for the players to actually interact with. If everything's an animated book and a broom and a bookcase, who are they going to talk to? Well, it turns out that the author had that taken care of because there are some really fun things for them to interact with, including 2 talking homunculi named Cumin and Coriander who rule over the kitchen. And they want to make food for someone.
Great stuff.
Now they can provide the clues that the players and the characters need to learn about the password and getting back through the portal and what's going on in this mansion. But they also want to make food because they're cooks. All they have around them are cats and fairy dragons who really they don't eat a wide variety of things. So, fun to role play with them. These two fairy dragons who want to sort of trick and taunt the characters, not kill them, but, play around with them, because the cats are no fun to play with. So these dragons want to do some fun things. So we have all sorts of potential for fun role playing for new players in that way. There are some puzzles. The puzzles aren't overly complicated. There's a planetarium with special stars highlighted. In the next room, there are 5 telescopes. Well, in the last room, there were 5 stars highlighted. So if you point the telescope at the stars, then the secret door is revealed. And, so cool things like that aren't overly complicated. You can always give hints if necessary, but for the most part, they shouldn't need too many of those hints. The main puzzle that the characters are trying to solve is how to get back through the portal. And they do so by finding 7 very specific and unusual books, each one with a single letter on its spine. And these homunculi and dragons give clues about finding those books. If the players don't get those hints first, and they go through rooms and with tons of books laying here and there, they may need a clue from you that these books are important. The big clue is that they have Mordenkainen on the cover, and so did the book back in the office back in Candlekeep. So there's a clue that you can provide to let them know. So overall, it's a search these unusual rooms, interact with these unusual creatures, a few fights with animated things, crawling claws, nothing sentient that you need to worry about. And overall, it's a fun little adventure. Then when you put all the clues together, you get the password out after finding the 7 books, and you can find your way back to Candlekeep. Unfortunately, the imp that killed the person that you were looking for, Matrius, has killed him and is hiding invisibly back in the office. So the characters may have to deal with him, but then they're on their way to, now maybe there's another person who can help us. Or who is this Vistandia? We know she's still alive because her homunculi is still alive. And maybe she can help us. Or maybe she's mad that we entered her. You can go in various directions from there. But overall, for a first adventure, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good too. And I thought it was it's neat because we've talked about this before, these are all new, or many of them are new authors. And so this adventure you reviewed, Michael Polkinghorne wrote it, and he is someone who, works in a vineyard, has been playing D&D throughout the ages, runs a podcast, and ended up being an author on this, right? And so it shows that sort of diversity of how people can come from all kinds of different angles to contribute to D&D. Mm-hmm. I think this would be a fun adventure to run. I was overall really impressed with the quality of all of these pieces.
Yep.
Shall I talk about mine?
Yeah, totally.
So a number of them are written by D&D designers, and as you would expect, some of the more fun ones come from sort of people who have a long background in it. The one that I'm picking to cover is Shemsheim's Bedtime Rhyme by Ari Levitch, who is a member of the D&D team and has a lot of experience in working on these kinds of things. And we should say that every one of these adventures is focused on a book and includes the art of that book, which is a neat part of it. Mm-hmm. And this one is particularly interesting because it sort of has these mechanical clockwork features on the side of the spine of the book. And we then later get art of the book when it's open, because this is not a book with pages. You open it and you see 4 different kind of pop-up book-like sections that will move and play music. And the whole premise of this adventure is, and it's exactly what I like about it, is very different than most adventures. And often when I look at a book like Candlekeep Mysteries that has given me a bunch of different kind of one-shots that I can run, right, small adventures, I want interesting stuff in it. Something that I might not have seen before. Not just, explore the wizard tower, but give me a unique kind of experience. And in this case, it is a very different experience, because what this is all about is that this book is cursed. Someone found it, and it plays a nursery rhyme that gets stuck in your head, and you will hum it, and then everyone around you who hears you humming it will hum it, and it's sort of this rhyme plague that is starting to take over. And that idea, and so what happens is that you are staying at the House of Rest. People begin to hum this, and the Avowed very quickly shut the place down and put you in quarantine. So you are in Firefly Cellar where you are staying, and you and several NPCs are in this quarantine area until people figure out what's going on. Well, guess what? You're going to be the one to figure it out because the book is down here with you, and you don't know that initially. So it plays out as a sort of mystery that has 6 events that the DM can control the pace of to push the narrative forward. And so these events can kind of come in at any point the DM chooses to push the mystery in one way or another, and certain things can't happen until events take place. And the big part of this is, even once you get the book has been damaged, so you don't have the whole rhyme. And in fact, when players are singing it early on, you will give them a copy of the rhyme as a handout, and they don't have the final piece. And the final piece is necessary to solve the overall puzzle and defeat the big bad. You also have that kind of role-playing component that gets built in, where at various points the players can fall under the curse and you may want to have them sing it out loud. So you give them the rhyme, which I think is kind of fun. This is for 4th level PCs, and it has some parts that are a little brutal. They could be pretty beat up if they don't have healing by the time of the final combat, so it's probably worth watching. But what's neat is at the end, you finally find who has the book. You realize part of the book is broken. When you fix it, you can get the last piece of the rhyme, and the undead spirit of Shemshime, the creator of the book, appears. And the Shemshime has a number of interesting sort of attacks that they can do, including making people attack each other, which characters attacking each other tends to be one of the highest damage things you can come up with. So that can hurt, especially if they've been hit a lot earlier. So, it's something to watch. But what makes it super interesting is Shemshime will be at 1 hit point and can't go below that until you use the last part of the rhyme to solve how to kill them, which involves crushing Shemshime under at least 1,000 pounds, I think it is. So there are 3 different things they can use to crush Shemshime, and Shemshime will follow the person who has the book. So that's sort of a mechanism that you can use, which I think is fine. It's not overly complicated. Run around, topple things onto Shemshime. I think that's perfectly fun. It's the kind of thing that maybe sounds a little simple, but actually I think in play will be a lot of fun. So I like the premise. I love the events. And I'm not covering this, but every one of the rooms down in this Firefly Cellar is detailed and can be explored as the characters are trying to figure out what went wrong. And it's just very imaginative, very creative. And the whole being here is kind of neat. And in fact, I think that if you're thinking of how do I merge from the real life pandemic we've all been in, and feel like you've defeated the pandemic, this kind of lets you defeat a pandemic. So it may be what you're looking for. It's not overly dark. It can be. I couldn't help but read it and think, this is like beating a pandemic. I kind of like this. So it's a great way to run your group through your first post-pandemic game by beating a pandemic.
Nice. Yeah. I like the sort of different mindset almost. More of the sort of the exploration, interaction sort of aspect of it, rather than just being a dungeon delve. I appreciated that as a different sort of flavor.
And it is all in Candlekeep.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, and it's the one that takes place in Candlekeep.
Nice.
Just really quickly before we wrap up, there are a number of good ones in here. Alcazar's Appendix is an adventure that's a Desert Tomb type adventure by Adam Lee. No surprise that Adam Lee just knocks this out of the park. If you like Pharaoh or classic adventures like that, if you love your desert type tomb stuff, this is awesome. Derek Ruiz, who is Elvin Tower on the interwebs, writes Sarah of Yellowcrest Manor, which is a dark mystery, very Ravenlofty. You could easily slide this and several other adventures into a Ravenloft campaign. Daniel Kwan writes The Book of Inner Alchemy, which is a kind of monk martial art type fest. Very cool as well. Some really neat NPCs in that. Xanthoria is by the awesome Tony Winslow Brill, and it's all about Zugmoy. No surprise, given Tony Winslow Brill's Greyhawk lore connection type love. This is a fungal plague adventure, so another defeat the plague kind of thing.
Yep.
There's some really neat aspects to that adventure as well. And shout out to the editors and developers who worked on the tome, because a lot of these writers were first-time writers. If you've listened to the Dragon Talk podcast, you can hear them talk about how hard it was for them to write and how valuable it was to have people like Bill Benham, Scott Fitzgerald Gray, Kim Mohan, Hannah Rose, and others work with all of these people to get it to this stage. So it's good.
Any designer knows, tip your editor, tip your developer, because they're the ones that can make your mistakes into gold. And you're always going to make mistakes no matter what. So good on them. Awesome. Any final thoughts on this book? I heard mixed reviews when it came out, and I didn't read every adventure in here, but for the parts I read, I was happy with. I thought you don't have to write perfect adventures, but you have to write adventures that DMs can make perfect for their own groups. And I think all the ones I read certainly fit that bill.
Yeah, no, it's good. I would recommend it. I was a little worried too, but no, this is fun. There's some fun ideas in here and lots of good one-shot potential. And yeah,
awesome. So thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed that review, and thank you to our patrons who are helping keep the lights on. And patrons, if you are a patron of Mastering Dungeons, we have something special for you this week. Teos, tell them what they've won.
You've won a copy of Rules for Collaborative Campaign Creation. So this is a product that I just put up on DriveThru, and I created it when I was on the D&D Dragon Talk podcast with Shelley Mazanoble as we're going through how to do collaborative campaign creation. And I have given out copies free to anyone who joins my mailing list, but we're also giving it out to everybody who is on the MMP Patreon. So if you join patreon.com/MMP, you will get a copy of this sent to you as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Teos. Where can people find you and your work and your new mailing list?
Woo! Join the mailing list at alphastream.org and get free stuff in the future. Find me on Twitter at alphastream. Where are you hiding, Sean?
I am hiding on Twitter right now at Sean Merwin. You can also go to the forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com and let us know what you think about what we're talking about. And if you want to follow the podcast itself on Twitter, you can go to @MasteringDND. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. So, Teos, now that we have explored and escaped from Candlekeep mostly unscathed, what should we do now?
I think that we have a new companion, which is a swarm of books that's going to come along with us in our adventures, and that's what we're going to use to kill some monsters.
Do you know how animated books attack?
Tell me.
With a book club.